Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NovoVia Radio Show. In this radio show, we talk about everything motivational interviewing. And today I have a special guest that has passion for MI and the environment. So I would like to take the time to introduce Vince. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Hey, Vince, thanks for being here.
Hello. So I'm Vince, and I've been doing this work in motivational interviewing in the environment for like 10 years now. And I first came into this idea of motivational interviewing in the environment in many instances, like many people got their way there through the intersection of knowing a psychologist. And in this case, it was actually my husband when we were carpooling to school one day. And so I asked him, how do you actually help somebody who's, addicted to drugs? How do you help them quit? And he's like, oh, well, I do this, that, or I do motivational interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was going through this MBA program, I learned this root cause analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been very interested in the environment. So the question really was, well, what's at the root cause of environmental challenges? And there's a lot of behavioral things, a lot of things like people being kind of like sold like anti-science. How do we immunize them against that? Or environmentalists communicating in a way that was sort of like based on their motivations instead of the other person's motivations. Well, how can we do that? And ultimately, I found my way to motivational interviewing, and I haven't really looked back.
That is so exciting. So who would you say are your like clients? Like, because it's easy to put it into that. If you're a psychologist, you have like a client or a patient, if you're a doctor. So who would you say that your clients are that you're actually using motivational interviewing with?
Well, so I mean, as a motivational interviewing trainer,
Mhm.
and that really is my focus. I mean, in this past 10 years of work, I did do work that was more client facing. Now, a lot of times I actually spend my time supporting and developing environmentalists, environmental minded people, to be more effective with their clients. But who are those clients? I mean, a good example might be a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. So I've trained hundreds upon hundreds, like many, like probably about like 900 people, maybe more from Citizens Climate Lobby. And this is the largest constituent lobby group advocating for a carbon price around the world. Um,
Okay.
and so Canada was the first nation in the world to have a nationwide carbon fee and dividend pricing scheme, which is the most evidence-based pricing scheme that we have. And so I would work with Citizens Climate Lobby constituents to talk with their elected representatives in a more MI way.
Interesting. Very interesting. Because I love working with teens, and I've written a book about teens, and I think it's really important to listen to what they have to say. And what I'm noticing is that there's a lot more teens that are climate aware than actually adults. I notice with my own kids that they've grown up in the recycling, or just taking care of the environment in a way that I might not have done at their age. So that's really cool. And we came into contact a couple of years ago, and I remember you telling me about games, this climate game you were developing, because I myself really like gamifying things. And I think that if you have a good time and you're having fun and you're having positive emotions, then you actually learn a lot better.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about that process and how the game works.
So about 4 years ago, in this instance, I was actually doing programming with students in the Toronto District School Board.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was working with a group of eco schools teachers. So there's this international program called Eco Schools,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's kind of like you get like bronze, silver, gold, or platinum, and then it's like a challenge for young people to make their school as green as it can be, and there's learning on the way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually was talking with them, and our goal was to create a cultural transformation in the schools.
Yeah.
And uh, so when I was working with them, I kind of felt a little bit like I was parachuting in. And nobody
Mm-hmm.
wants somebody to get parachuted in and solve all their problems.
Yeah.
So I was like, nah, this isn't going to work. Really, the source of the cultural transformation needs to be the people in place.
Mm.
So we started to develop this game as a way to develop community
Mm.
and help the people that are in the school to find their leadership potential and find their empathy and find their way to almost sort of like a pseudo pre-motivational interviewing communication style where they get their classmates, their administrators, their faculty, their housekeeping staff to look at the entire school body as a team, rippling out from these group of very motivated students that are on these eco clubs. And so that was the start of the game Course Correction, which is it's a gamified learning experience that's really underpinned by the principles of motivational interviewing.
That's excellent. Well, there's probably some people that know what motivational interviewing is, and there's also probably some people who might need a little bit of a refresher. Would you mind explaining the game based on those principles of MI?
Absolutely. So okay, so in motivational interviewing, one of the core things in motivational interviewing is this concept of accurate empathy. There's other concepts that are key and critical within motivational interviewing, including acceptance,
Mm.
compassion, non-judgment. So these principles are often referred to as the MI spirit or the motivational interviewing spirit. Personally, I like to call it the MI band of emotions. Um, and so it's just a specific set of emotions that when we feel these emotions, we actually communicate in a much more open, spirited way.
Mhm.
And so in this game, like, I mean, I imagine you listening at home, for many of you, unless you're a board game aficionado, then when you think board game, you probably think something like Monopoly.
Yeah.
Now, I like to, take a bit of a poke at Monopoly and say, you're just stuck in a spin wheel of doom where, everyone is eventually going to go bankrupt except for one person whose favorite place is jail. And so that right there is sort of board game theming at its worst.
Yeah, I
Uh,
can
so,
I can agree with that because we just played Monopoly and it's easy to kind of get all like grumpy with each other too. So not so much am I.
so that's what MI would not be. But let's picture these sort of like open-spirited principles where we come together and we're collaborative. How does that look like in a game? Well, there's actually an entire genre of board games called cooperative board games where you work together with the other players in order to solve a challenge. In this case, you work together to help your school become a platinum eco school. And you get to play as these dynamic, each character is actually unique and special in their own way. And then you work together to bring your skills and your special abilities to life and help your school be a platinum eco school. So yeah.
Wow. That is it's so interesting to listen to how it's designed too, because like you said, MI is about empathy and like understanding other people, and it's about creating and collaborating, doing things together. And the environment is probably something that we should all be thinking the same about, but I think people probably have different perspectives. I'm thinking even different parts of Canada have different perspectives on the environment and how big your car should be and stuff like that. So I'm from Alberta, so I can say that. So but you and then just like I think a lot about like the collaboration. I mean, you're teaching children and kids or teens to have skills like social skills and having the bigger goal of like promoting positive environmental changes. So it's on so many levels.
Yeah, it really is like a very rich experience. And concluding the game experience, we've created we really tried to draw from like some of the best of what gaming has to offer, and draw an inspiration from really wonderful games. So there's actually one of the inspirations was a game called Betrayal at the House on the Hill, which is actually a horror genre game where you work together to explore this haunted house and try to escape the haunted house alive after the haunt is
Cool.
revealed. But in this, there's 36 different endings. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so also the same thing in our game is we wrote epilogues.
Mm.
So that way, after you conclude the game, then you get to see what happened at the end. Like, so you did all these efforts, you ran all these projects to build up your school. Where did that like get you to? And so if you reach, a platinum epilogue, it's a glimpse into the future.
Mm.
Um, and this is what you did. So very affirmational.
Yeah, definitely. And also to be able to help like younger kids and teens with their like thinking about the consequences of their actions in like a playful environment as well. So, wow, it sounds fantastic.
I'm also looking for connecting with different foundations,
Mm,
and how we can actually bring this to life, as well with foundation funding,
yes.
so that we can make this available for educators in places where maybe they don't have a budget
Yeah.
to acquire these types of learning tools
Mm,
for their students.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic. And I was thinking too, like, wow, maybe we should translate it into Swedish eventually too.
well, interest on that note, like a very dear friend of mine, actually a former MI student, is actually translating the game into French. So it's already going to be bilingual. In another month or so, it's going to be ready in French. So even our first production run, will have the translation there. So absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Oh, well, we will definitely. I'm thinking that's so Canadian too, French and English. I'm loving it.
Yes.
So, if as we're coming to a close here, I'm wondering, Vince, usually, I mean, like I said in the beginning, it's am I and the environment, like how do you talk about it and who do you talk to and etc. Can you give us maybe like your best tips on using am I in conversations about the environment?
Absolutely. So, I mean, um, really my focus as an MI trainer, and like I hone in on this concept that I call it the MI band of emotions. And so it's referring to the concept, if you do know more about it, the MI spirit, but I like to think about it as these set of emotions that when I feel them, like something magical happens. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought very deeply about each of those emotions. And so I like to actually present. So the first tip would be look at yourself almost like with an emotion camera and take like an emotional selfie and say, what color is that selfie? Like, is it green? Is it yellow? Or is it red?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, what do the different colors mean? You may be asking, but you kind of know what like different emotion colors are. Green is like calm, cool, collected. Yellow is hesitant, unsure, unaware. Red is angry, upset, anxious.
Mm,
So are you in the green or are you in a different color? And
mhm,
so in environmental like applications of I find that well, for any MI anywhere, we have to be in the green. If we're
mm.
not in the green, whatever communications we're doing, it's not MI.
Right, right.
So we need to be in the green. And so that's a pre-requirement for
Mm,
doing motivational interviewing. But how this relates to the environment is I find that um, there's a lot of anxiety
mm,
in people's hearts over the environment. It's a question about the future, a
mhm,
question about like what will be the future for my children.
mhm.
And that sort of insecurity can pull us out of the green. And it
Right.
can pull us into the yellow, that insecurity. That's very much a yellow emotion.
Mhm.
Um, so I like to teach acceptance as a way to bring yourself back to the green.
Right.
And I would demonstrate it visually, which is there's something before you that is stressful, that is anxiety inducing, like let's say something like climate change.
Mhm.
So if we see this thing and we look at it and we feel the anxiety in our hearts and we
Mm.
start to tone away, that's non-acceptance.
Right.
But if we look at it again, we start to tone away and come back and say, I'm going to just look at this anxiety mindfully and
Mm.
stay in the green. That's one of the things that acceptance is exceptionally good at, is
Right.
us back to the green, when
Mm.
otherwise we might go into the yellow or the red and
Mhm.
ultimately stop our motivational interviewing.
That's right. That's right. It almost sounds like, when you think about like your threat system and your soothing system and drive system as well. It's a lot about that. And if, of course, if I'm not feeling like calm, cool, and collected, I'm not going to be a good communicator, and I'm definitely not going to be good for the environment.
Yeah.
Okay, great first tip. So think about keeping yourself in the green and also accepting yourself if you sometimes step out of the green, that it's okay, come back in. Good. Any other
Absolutely.
tips for us?
Sure. Well, another tip, and so my focus very much is on the pedagogy of emotion. I absolutely love talking about emotion. So the next tip is also going to be on emotion, but a different one this time, which is curiosity. So
Ah,
a lot of times people talk about curiosity and they say, well, we've even got a bit of a bad name for curiosity because, we've got, curiosity killed the cat. We've got,
yes.
curiosity drove like Eve to bite an apple and that was bad. Shouldn't have done
Right.
that. But is curiosity actually bad?
Mm,
I would say curiosity is actually a wonderful thing, and it is a key critical emotion in order to do motivational interviewing. And
mm,
the reason why that is because uh, I like to think of that motivational interviewing is hard. It is
mm.
hard.
It is
And
hard.
so we've got four brain spaces, and what are our brain spaces doing before we're all full up and we've got no brain space left to think about anything else? Well, we got to listen to the tone of somebody. We've got to listen to their body language with our eyes.
Mhm.
And we've got to hear their words and kind of integrate these three things into something meaningful. And we're left with a tiny little pinky to figure out what the heck we're going to say back to someone that's going to help them make a change.
Yes.
Really, really difficult. So now, how does this relate to curiosity? Well, I could come into a conversation like this,
Mm,
or I could come into a conversation like this with all four of my brain spaces open. So
right. Yeah.
curiosity is really, really good
Mm,
at taking all that cognitive load and letting it go and
mm,
opening up all four of my brain spaces. So
right.
that way I can focus very, very deeply on what the other person has to say.
Exactly. And this also too kind of, or for me, it kind of connects with the acceptance part too. Because if you're deeply listening to someone, maybe someone who's worried about the environment or climate change, or not worried about the environment or climate change, you actually need those four brain spaces to be able to communicate and be non-judgmental in front of that like perspective. So that's a good tip. Thank you. Great tips, Vince. Do you have one more for us today?
Yeah, so I guess for my last tip, what I would say, and I've seen this a lot with the
Mm,
environment. Um, and it's sometimes at face like a communication you see like it is not actually what it is at face value. So
mm,
if we get resistance, we think that it's resistance, but is it? If we hear
mm.
somebody's change goal, we have a change goal. Is that actually the right change goal, or
Right.
isn't? And so, like, in order to, I mean, well, we just talked a second about curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
which helps us to unpack and see, like, what lies beneath. But
Mm,
when we go at something with curiosity, we might see things that originally might have been confusing, and
mm.
we're going to need to be able to parse out some of this, what lies beneath. Like, for
Right.
example, I was doing canvassing for a political candidate. In this case, it happened to be in the Green Party,
Mm,
and I knocked on someone's door. They opened it, and they were a supporter of the most conservative party in Canada.
mm,
Um, and so she said something along the lines of like, oh well, I don't need to talk to you because, like I'm with this party. And so before she closed the door, I said, well, I actually value that so much. And, you know, this might be the most important conversation that I have today, because if our candidate does get elected,
mm.
it's still her job to represent you.
Uh-huh.
And so we have two polling questions that we're asking about two specific issues today. And I really value your opinion.
Mm,
Would you be willing to share your
mm,
thoughts and your ideas on these two topics?
mm,
And she said yes. And then she ended up just starting to have a conversation about environment herself.
mm,
And I interacted with her, really seeing what lies beneath.
mhm.
Um, and ultimately, by the end of that conversation, we talked for about 7 minutes. And by the end, we would like she was voicing that sustainable food and water was important, and that's what we need to be focusing on.
Right.
And you know, is she wrong?
Mm,
Like to me, it sounded like a really important focus for
mm.
how we actually address environmental need.
Right.
So really, we come in expecting a resistance. So we come in expecting that this person's never going to accept the change
Mm,
target that I have. But
mm,
maybe there is actually, a willingness to go down this road and
mhm,
explore what is their version of the change
mm.
target. So taking your cues from the other.
That's right. So it sounds to me like you're talking about kind of an openness to other perspectives, but also I want to go back to curiosity too, because right there you were being curious to her perspective. And by being curious to her perspective, you might have also learned something new.
Oh, heck yeah. I love to learn something new.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it all like relates to each other, and I think the best part of everything is that you didn't like say, well, why do you think like that? You provided an environment for her to think and express herself, and we all know in motivational interviewing, when we hear ourselves talk, we believe what we say, and then we can change. So,
Yay.
yay! Did you ding? Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Vince, for those wonderful tips. And I'm going to also write them down underneath here. So there'll be all sorts of information out and about after the radio show. But I wanted to say a special thank you for coming and spending half an hour or whatever we've been talking about Am I in the Environment? Because what I learned and what I take away is that we can't ever forget that every conversation we can sow a little seed, and it can be wherever. And those seeds will become trees and save the environment. So thank you so much, Vince, and we will be in touch. Thank
Thank
you.
you for having me.
Thanks for coming.